Who is the biggest troll in history? April Fool's Day 1974, when a man burned 70 rubber tires on a dormant volcano in Alaska. This has to be up there. He waited 3 years to get a helicopter to fly the tires to the top to get a picture perfect condition. He even got the Coast Guard called out to, and here's the link to the story. Porky's favorite response to the prank came in 1980. He received a letter from an attorney in Denver, inside of which was a clipping from the Denver Post with a photo of Mount Street. Helen's erupting. Attached was a note that read, "This time, you little bastard. You've gone too far." Amazing. I totally read that in Hunter S. Thompson's voice. The old-timey New York City newspaper The Sun in the 19th century, they published some articles about the presence of life on the moon, like unicorns, winged humans, and other creatures who built temples and lived peacefully. This caused a massive moon craze until it was later outed as fake. The old-timey New York City newspaper The Sun, the most popular tabloid newspaper in the UK, is called The Sun, and it's famous for being a perpetual geyser of complete bollocks. If hell has a department for ironic punishments, I imagine Rupert Murdoch will be punished by actually having to read every article published in The Sun. There was a Russian, I can't remember his name, who managed to make a officer uniform out of scraps of clothing. He used it to convince a few guards on patrol to follow him into a government building, ordered the arrest of the man in charge, confiscated all the money personally, sent the arrested man to Berlin, claiming it was all on order of the king. He then ditched the uniformed, got on a train to Berlin and managed to beat the guards there. He then sat back and watched the absolute confusion happen. The guy was eventually arrested, but the public turned him into a celebrity and his actions into a play that was performed all over Germany. He wasn't incarcerated for long, and after his release he lived an easy life from there on. The Kaiser even was proud for this to happen, because it showed how much the people trusted the authorities. I get it, but I won't exactly be proud if the authorities got easily fooled like that either. He probably said that to help save face. Wouldn't exactly look good. But if you turned it into a joke, especially since everyone else already had, then it becomes well received. Now, he was probably being genuine. The Prussian military tradition was all about blind obedience to your superior officers. That's largely why the Prussian tradition was so widely adopted. In the 30s-40s, BBC did an April Fool's broadcast where they told people how spaghetti was made on trees. They literally showed fake spaghetti trees, and since not many people in that time knew how spaghetti was made, lots of people believed it. The BBC also put out a Halloween ghost hunt special in I think late 80s early 90s. It was advertised as an adult show and as fiction, but was recorded very much like the ghost hunting shows all over the TV these days. People tuned in after it had started, not having seen the adverts, and believes it was real. When the presenter at the home was injured, and then it seemed like the studio presenter, Michael Parkinson, seemed to be possessed, the whole country went mad. It was called Ghost Watch, and it was never shown again on any BBC channel. I think you can watch on YouTube though. It is actually pretty creepy even now. This scared the ever-living fuck out of me when I saw it on TV as a kid. I was about 11 or 12 when it came on, and I had a mate over for a sleepover that night. We watched with my family and all of us were totally freaked out. My mate was so scared he ended up going home as he was convinced the ghosts were going to come through the TV. Technically this isn't a troll, since it was serving a purpose. But Admiral Nelson was escaping a French fleet when a man fell overboard. It was Nelson's policy of never leaving anyone behind, so he turned his ship around to go pick him up. The French saw his ship turn back toward them, assumed he had reinforcement coming beyond the horizon, so they turned and ran. A story of Horatio Nelson. He personally was terrified of drowning, so he refused to let any of his men suffer that fate. Seems like a good human. The term treat people how you wanna be treated come to mind. Theodore Hook, the perpetrator of the Berners Street hoax in London in 1810, in which Cook sent thousands of letters summoning all manners of various vendors and service people and physicians and dignitaries and others to all come to one random person's home, literally shutting down a large part of London as they all descended upon the same address throughout the day, all while Cook and a friend sat watching from a house across the street, presumably laughing their asses off the whole time. Basically, the first ever DDoS, distributed denial of street. I was thinking more like the mortician who patented the automatic telephone switch 3 years after finding out his rival's wife worked as a telephone operator and would reroute calls asking for his funeral parlor to her husband's. The guy put a whole worldwide workforce out of work for one person's actions. Edit. Thank you for the upvotes and awards, you guys are awesome. Spite is a powerful thing. Yeah. I'm opening a spite store right next to Mocha Joe's. Know what I'm gonna call it? Latleries. How are the scones? In China there was the War of the Three Kingdoms. The Wei, Shu, and Wu. Two of their armies met in battle and the smaller was out of arrows. They were separated by a river. One night, the leader of the smaller army stocked the front of their boats/rafts with straw bales and moved toward the opposing army over the river. They were immediately hailed with arrows. The men ducked behind the straw while the arrows stuck in the straw, undamaged. They then sailed away and yelled, "We thank you for the arrows. We will return them shortly." This may just be a tall tale from Romance of the Three Kingdoms. How could you miss Zhuge Liang? Dude was a master strategist, but he took a vacation to a castle in Shu territory for a bit of a break, only to be informed that a massive army was heading towards his location. Now, this castle was considered of little importance and wasn't defended, like, at all. So Zhuge had no forces to fortify any sort of defense. Realizing this, and with the army approaching, he decided to take a walk in the village. When the army arrived, he was sitting under a tree in the square, playing an instrument. No bodyguards. No forces standing by. Just him, playing an instrument. The opposing army fled in fear immediately. After all, the head strategist is in the square calmly playing music. What sort of army was he hiding out of sight? Spread throughout the city to tear them apart? For the master strategist to just be sitting in the open? None. No army. Just balls of steel and masterful trolling. TBF, this was very likely a fake story created for OTK. For numerous reasons there was an actual empty fort strategy used successfully by Shu at some point though. I think Zhao Yun and someone else used it. It was actually Sun Quan later on when Wu was subjugating what is Korea today. He did it twice, because on the first pass the boat was lopsided. So he did it a second time, so it wouldn't be. RoTK makes Zhuge into a god, and gives credit from everyone else's deeds to him. He was a smart dude, but not the genius he's portrayed as. Didn't George R. Martin once say that in the future he would love to get people so immersed in a fantasy world novel and never finish it? This would have happened with Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series. He died partly through writing the 13th and final book in the series. But Brandon Sanderson finished it using his notes and concluded the series. I'm pretty sure most fans received it pretty well. Sanderson is such a fucking champ. Love that guy. The new Stormlight book is just days away. Oh fuck. RYTHM of War. I've been waiting for over a year and it still somehow snuck up on me. I'm so excited. I needed some good news. Thanks. Eric the Red. He wanted people to come and live in his newfound ice-covered land, so he named it Greenland. Hey, I heard there's this even better place, called Wineland. Just a bit further, there's a belief to why it was named Wineland, Vinland. That's not due to trickery though. When first settled the climate was very different, much warmer and had an abundant yield of grapes. Therefore the name. I remember reading that during the same time England also had great amount of grapes. But climate changed drastically, and the area was forced to be abandoned, and Icelanders had to adapt to living in harsher and colder weather. Now I'm not a scientist and you should do your own research before settling with my explanations though. The peak of the Viking Age coincided with unusually warm temperatures, which is why doing things like settling Greenland and sailing across the iceberg-covered North Atlantic seemed like perfectly reasonable ideas at the time. but then seemed like myths just a couple generations later. It was an unusually warm period followed immediately by an unusually cool period. The Little Ice Age saw temps considerably lower than they are today. Stephen Hawking was in an interview when a cord was unplugged and alarm went off. This was before he was completely immobile and he slumped in his chair. The people interviewing him were scared out of their minds until they realized that he was alright and chuckling at his joke. The cord and alarm were for a computer. Stephen Hawking was a surprisingly funny guy. I've heard quite a few stories of him being a troll or making jokes. In his last book his daughter wrote an anecdote of how he would sometimes drive way too fast with his wheelchair on campus with her on board, scaring people in the process. I love the fact that his wheelchair was even set up with the possibility of moving at speeds possible of being deemed way too fast. Sir, there's really no reason for the gearing to ever allow for anything in excess of 5 miles per hour. I said 15 miles per hour. I'm pretty certain I didn't stutter when I gave you the requirements. It's all relative. Marcel Duchamp, among other fun things, submitted a urinal as an art piece to the Society of Independent Artists under a pseudonym, and then was part of the board that was set to approve pieces. He also spread rumors of another piece he was working on so people wouldn't suspect anything. Love that dude. Plus he sparked an interesting discussion in art. He is also responsible for a painting titled LHOOQ. It was of the Mona Lisa sporting a mustache and a wee goatee. The letters in the title, when pronounced in French, sound very like she has a hot ass. Apostrophe. Literally yes, though it's an expression that means she's horny. Today I learned. Thank you. My school French was entirely insufficient. It did nothing to help with idiomatic French. Diogenes became notorious for his philosophical stunts, such as carrying a lamp during the day, claiming to be looking for an honest man. He criticized Plato, disputed his interpretation of Socrates, and sabotaged his lectures, sometimes distracting listeners by bringing food and eating during the discussions. Diogenes was also noted for having mocked Alexander the Great, both in public and to his face, when he visited Corinth in 336 BC. My favorite Diogenes story. Diogenes stood outside a whorehouse yelling insults at the customers for visiting women of ill repute. They began giving him small coins to shut him up. When he collected enough coins he went in the whorehouse. And once when he saw the son of a whore throwing rocks into a crowd he said, "Take care you don't hit your father." Apostrophe. Damn, that's a burn. This Chinese general whose city was besieged by a much larger army, so he opened the main gate and sat atop it playing his flute. The enemy thought it was a trap, so they packed their stuff and left. If I remember correctly, that's advice from The Art of War. Audacity and nonchalance as a method to counter an overwhelming force. I don't know about The Art of War, but it is mentioned in another ancient Chinese strategy guide, the 36 Stratagems, where it is called the empty fort strategy. Basically, if you act calm and harmless, they will think you're luring them into an ambush and run away. It can also be used to actually lure your enemy into an ambush by making them think you're just trying to make them think you're luring them into an ambush. Effective against opponents who are prone to overthinking. It can also be used to actually lure your enemy into an ambush by making them think you're just trying to make them think you're luring them into an ambush. Haha, you fool. You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. Inconceivable. Gregor McGregor. He was a Scotsman who claimed to own land in the New World. He got fake maps printed, fake pictures drawn, then published it all in a big convincing book. He then got over 200 people to emigrate to this paradise and, get this, dropped them in the Central American jungle. Many died. Some returned and blamed the expedition guide for directing them to the wrong location. Still believing Gregor's story. The more you read, the crazier it gets. Gregor McGregor, a stereotypical conman's name, if there ever was one. Giles Corey, a farmer caught up in the Salem witch trials. He was sentenced to pressing, being slowly crushed by stones, to force him to make a plea. Every time he was questioned, he simply said more weight. He died without making a plea. If he pled innocent, they would have convicted him anyway and taken his property from his family. If he pled guilty, they would have convicted him and taken his property from his family. If you don't enter a plea, the court at the time could not exercise jurisdiction over you. That's why courts occasionally tortured people into making a plea. Since he didn't enter a plea, the court couldn't take all his shit. That's hardcore AF. Died to protect his family's livelihood. The dude who somehow got a network news program to say that a plane that crashed was piloted by 4 men with the names Holy fuck something Wanwi to Lo Bang Ding Ao. The guy who decided to put an ice troll 3/4 the way up the path to High Hrothgar. I think it's a great introduction to how you should always be quick saving. I've never even played Skyrim, but I feel this pain. Theodore Roosevelt, he got shot, went on a 1-hour speech mocking his assassin, and then went to hospital. Friends, I shall ask you to be as quiet as possible. I don't know whether you fully understand that I have just been shot, but it takes more than that to kill a bull moose. Fucking legend. Basil Zaharoff, a Greek arms dealer. He once donated a submarine to the Greek government. He then told the Turks that the Greeks had a submarine and sold them 2 submarines. Lastly, he went to the Russians and told them the Turks had 2 submarines, so he sold them 2 as well. None of the submarines actually worked. Edit. Donated to the Greeks. Not sold. He donated the Greeks 1. Greece fought WW1 with weapons mostly donated from him. The same weapons were used in WW2 as well. Whoever decided to delete Club Penguin. Global warming. Outstanding move. Michelangelo, without a doubt. This man was hired to paint a chapel and put more dicks and asses on it than you ever did see. Pope, my boy. This is a holy place. Please treat it with the utmost respect. Michelangelo. He by Agio d'Assassina. What's with all the buts? This would suit a brothel more than a chapel. Michelangelo, I've taken your criticism on board and decided I'd paint you. Hope you're okay with people seeing you naked with man tits, donkey ears, and your dick being bitten by a snake forever. Mic drop. It gets even better. When Biago complained to the Pope reportedly joked that his jurisdiction did not extend to hell and that the painting would have to stay. Well, he at least had humor. Close bracket. Russians and how they continuously retreated when Napoleon tried to attack them, resulting him giving up due to the situations his army was facing, like disease. There is a fountain in Koblenz, Germany, built by a French general in honor of the successful campaign against the Russians, written on the fountain in French. When the Russians defeated Napoleon and came to Koblenz, they saw the fountain. Instead of tearing it down, the Russians added to the text in French, seen and approved by us, Russian commander of the city of Koblenz. That's a fantastic reverse card. Orson Welles did a radio play that told people the Martians were invading. The next day he told everyone that his play had freaked out millions of people, when it was a few dozen at most. Ironically, the troll wasn't Welles for running the show, but the papers for lying about its impact. Newspapers were terrified of radio and were constantly publishing stories about the evils of this satanic device. Local papers basically invented the story of the Martian panic wholesale, and it was an accepted part of history for decades before it was debunked. All you need to do is listen to the original show. The whole thing is an hour long. It starts off with an announcement of a War of the Worlds Halloween special. The first bit is standard 1920s radio fare, interrupted every now and again by fake reporters talking about a mysterious object that fell from the sky. By the 10-minute mark or so, he moves completely to the reporters discussing the invasion and the military response. 30 minutes in, there's a commercial break where Welles thanks listeners for tuning into his show. When the show picks up again, it's an audio play format where a man narrates himself walking through a devastated city while hiding from Martians. So whatever panic may or may not have happened could not have lasted longer than 15 minutes. Yeah, I bet the accidental nuke warning Hawaii have a couple years ago actually had a wholesale panic for 15 minutes. I mean, it was an emergency text from the government itself. Man, that was crazy. We heard all about that even in Australia. Must have been surreal for the people who got that text. The prophet Elijah heckled the priests of Baal because their god would not set fire to their sacrifice. Ike. The Bible says the priests of Baal prayed all day while Elijah heckled them. Hey, cool, sacrifice goose and by cool, I mean not on fire. It's like having Gordon Ramsay critique your pagan rituals. This virgin is raw. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos.